My father said, "We only kept you around because you helped with the bills. Now we don't need you anymore." The words hit the living room like a slap I never saw coming. There I was, Jessica, 34 years old, discovering that my existence in that house had been nothing more than financial convenience. The sentence came out of his mouth with cruel naturalness, as if it were obvious that I should have known this all along. I felt my knees go weak, and for a moment, I thought I might actually collapse right there on the hardwood floor that I'd helped pay to refinish 3 years ago. My mind raced back through every moment I'd spent in that house, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made, and suddenly, it all made sense with a clarity that was both devastating and oddly relieving. The puzzle pieces of my life were finally falling into place, creating a picture I'd been too naive to see before. I was heading to my room to get ready when I heard the animated conversation coming from the kitchen. My sister Emma had just graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University and landed a job at Weber & Associates, one of the most prestigious marketing firms in downtown Chicago. My parents, Robert and Linda, were euphoric, planning a celebration at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, the kind of place that cost more per meal than I used to spend on groceries for an entire week. The excitement in their voices was palpable. I could hear my mother's delighted laughter mixing with my father's proud declarations about his little girl conquering the corporate world. It was the kind of joy I'd spent my entire adult life hoping they might show for my achievements, but had learned to live without. "I'll just get changed real quick," I said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with a hopeful smile, assuming I'd naturally be included in the celebration. After all, hadn't I been the one supporting this family through Emma's entire college career? Hadn't I been the one making sure she could focus on her studies without worrying about money? That's when my dad looked at me with that cold expression I knew well, but always tried to ignore. His eyes held the same dismissive look I'd seen countless times over the years, but this time, there was something different, something final. "You're not part of this, Jessica. And since we're being honest, you can start packing your things. It's time for you to leave my house." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, trying to process what I'd just heard. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. Emma was next to Mom at the kitchen island, organizing the new Coach purse she'd gotten as a graduation gift, pretending not to pay attention to the conversation. But I could see the discreet smile at the corner of her mouth, the way her shoulders relaxed as if a burden had been lifted. She'd always known this day would come, hadn't she? The purse itself was worth more than I typically spent on myself in 3 months. Classic tan leather with the signature C pattern, probably around $800. I knew because I'd looked at it online once, dreaming of owning something so beautiful, before quickly closing the browser tab when I saw the price. That money had responsibilities attached to it. Emma's textbooks, the family's cable bill, groceries. "Why are you saying this, Dad?" I asked, still unable to believe it. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, smaller than usual, like I was 12 years old again asking why I couldn't have a birthday party like the other kids. He sighed like a man forced to explain basic arithmetic to someone who should have learned it years ago. The sigh was worse than the words somehow. It carried such casual dismissal, such utter certainty, that what he was saying was reasonable. "Because we only kept you around to help with bills and Emma's college tuition. Now that she has a good job, we don't need to pretend we like having you here anymore." The brutal honesty hit me like ice water. For 34 years I had lived in this house, and for the first time, someone was telling me the absolute truth about my place in it. It wasn't anger that came first, though that would come later. It was a strange sensation of relief, mixed with a pain so deep I felt it in my bones. Finally, after years of wondering why I always felt like an outsider in my own family, after years of making excuses for their behavior, after years of telling myself I was imagining the favoritism, finally, they were being honest with me. I grew up in that house, always feeling something was wrong, but I could never define exactly what. It was like living with a constant low-level headache that you eventually stop noticing, because it becomes your normal. My parents had always treated me differently compared to Emma, and I'd spent decades convincing myself there were good reasons for it. She was the baby, born when I was 12, And from the moment she arrived, she was treated like she was made of the finest crystal. I remember the day my parents brought her home from the hospital. I was so excited to have a little sister, imagining all the games we'd play, the secrets we'd share. Instead, I became her caretaker. Jessica, can you watch Emma while I take a shower? Jessica, Emma's crying. Can you rock her for a bit? Jessica, we're going out for dinner, but babies can't really enjoy restaurants yet. You don't mind staying home with her, do you? By the time I was 16, I was essentially a live-in babysitter who also did household chores. But I told myself it was normal. Older siblings help out. That's what families do. I was being mature and responsible. When Emma was born, I automatically became the responsible daughter. I was the one who helped with household chores, who took care of her when my parents went out, who gave up my own desires so she could have what she wanted. I was the one who explained to my friends why I couldn't go to the movies anymore, why I couldn't join the drama club, why I had to come home right after school. My teenage years weren't filled with rebellion or self-discovery. They were filled with diaper changes and bedtime stories, homework supervision, and endless loads of laundry. While other kids my age were figuring out who they were, I was figuring out how to be useful. Over the years, this dynamic intensified so gradually that I didn't even notice when I stopped being a daughter and became a kind of useful tenant who happened to share DNA with the landlords. The transition was so smooth, so natural-seeming, that by the time I realized what had happened, it felt too late to change anything. I'd built my entire identity around being helpful, being needed, being the one who solved problems and made life easier for everyone else. At 18, when I graduated high school and started working at Meridian Financial as a junior accountant, I naturally took on some household expenses. It started so innocently. Jessica, since you're working now and using more electricity with your computer for those online classes, maybe you could help with the electric bill, my father suggested one evening over dinner. Just this month, while we adjust the budget. It seemed reasonable. I was using the computer to study for my accounting certification at night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. The electric bill had probably gone up. Just this month turned into every month, and then other bills started getting added to my responsibilities. First, it was just the electric bill, because I used the computer to study at night. Then came the water bill because whoever uses more pays more, according to my dad, though I never understood how my 5-minute showers could account for the increase. Then the internet, because you're always online anyway. Each addition came with a logical explanation that I couldn't argue with. I was young, I was working, I was benefiting from these services. It made sense that I should contribute. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly being transformed from a family member into a source of revenue. Soon, I was covering practically all the utilities: electricity, water, internet, cable, and a portion of the rent on our 3-bedroom house in Lincoln Park. When Emma started preschool, I began contributing to her tuition too. It's an investment in the family's future, my parents explained. You'll benefit from having an educated sister. And when Emma started showing an interest in dance at age 5, I helped pay for lessons. When she wanted to learn piano at 7, I contributed to that too. When she needed a new laptop for middle school, I bought it. The requests were never demands. They were always framed as family decisions, family investments, things we were all contributing to together. Except I was the only one contributing, but I never questioned it seriously. Actually, I was kind of proud that I could help. I thought I was being a good daughter, a good sister. I thought my parents recognized my responsibility and maturity. I thought I was earning their respect and love through my contributions. What incredible naivety. What beautiful, heartbreaking self-deception. During all those years, while I worked full-time and covered family expenses, Emma could dedicate herself entirely to her studies and extracurricular activities. She never had to work during high school. She never had to work during college. She never had to choose between buying textbooks and eating lunch. She never had to calculate whether she could afford to go out with friends. She lived in a bubble of financial security that I had created and maintained, while I lived with constant anxiety about money. Even though I was making decent money, I was supporting essentially 3 people on my salary. There was never enough left over for me to build savings, take vacations, or invest in my own future. My parents always said Emma's education was an investment in the family's future. They painted a picture of a future where Emma's success would lift all of us up, where her achievements would somehow benefit everyone. They made it sound like I was buying stock in a company that would pay dividends later. The future had arrived. Emma graduated with a 3.9 GPA and a degree in marketing, with a concentration in digital strategy. She'd spent her junior year studying abroad in London, an experience I'd helped fund. She'd completed internships at top firms, connections facilitated by her sorority sisters, and the networking events I'd helped pay for. She'd landed a job at Weber & Associates, one of the most prestigious marketing firms in Chicago, earning $85,000 a year to start, plus benefits and bonuses. It was more than I made after 16 years in my field, but the success hadn't been achieved through her merit alone. It had been built on a foundation of privilege that I'd created, brick by brick, payment by payment, sacrifice by sacrifice. In recent months, I'd noticed a subtle change in my parents' behavior. They were more excited about Emma's job prospects, more hopeful about their financial future. They started making plans for home improvements, talking about taking a cruise, mentioning restaurants they wanted to try. Now I understood why. They weren't just proud of Emma's achievement as parents would naturally be. They were excited because they could finally get rid of their primary source of income and keep all the benefits Emma's success would bring. I was a business expense that was no longer necessary. "Jessica, are you listening?" My mother's voice brought me back to the present. She was looking at me with a mixture of impatience and embarrassment, the way you might look at someone who's overstayed their welcome at a party. Linda Morrison was 58 years old, with carefully maintained blonde highlights and the kind of nervous energy that came from always worrying about appearances. She'd never worked outside the home, at least not since Emma was born, claiming that raising children was a full-time job. Which it was, except I'd been doing most of the actual work since I was 12. "Your father is right," she continued, straightening Emma's new blazer with the kind of gentle attention she'd never shown my clothes. "Emma needs the space in your room to set up a home office. She'll be working remotely some days, and she needs a professional environment." My room. The room I'd painted myself in college because they said there wasn't money in the budget for a contractor. The room where I'd studied for my accounting certification, working late into the night while Emma slept peacefully in her larger, better-decorated room down the hall. The room where I'd cried myself to sleep more nights than I cared to remember, wondering why I always felt like I was failing some test I didn't even know I was taking. I looked at Emma, expecting her to say something, anything. Some word of protest, some acknowledgement of what I'd done for this family, some recognition that this was cruel and unfair. We'd shared a house for 22 years. Surely she felt some connection to me, some sisterly loyalty. But she was too busy admiring the new Apple Watch my parents had bought her as a professional starter kit gift. Rose gold with a leather band, the kind I'd looked at in the Apple store once before remembering I had a perfectly functional old watch and more pressing financial obligations. Her nails were perfectly manicured in a subtle nude color, recently done at the spa where my mother had taken her for a pre-career celebration day. Her hair was freshly cut and highlighted at the salon where I'd only been once, for my high school graduation, and that was because my mom's sister had given me a gift certificate. Emma looked successful already, polished and confident in a way I'd never been allowed to be. While I'd been working and contributing to household expenses, she'd been learning how to present herself, how to network, how to interview, how to succeed in corporate America. She looked like someone who belonged in a marketing firm. She looked like someone who'd never worried about money, never calculated the cost of lunch before ordering, never chosen generic brands to save $1.50 at the grocery store. She looked like someone who'd been invested in, rather than someone who'd done the investing. "When do you want me out?" I asked, surprised by the calm in my own voice. Inside I was screaming, but somehow my voice came out steady and controlled. "The sooner the better," said my dad, already reaching for his car keys. Robert Morrison was 55, a former insurance agent who'd retired early when his company downsized. He'd been looking for the right opportunity for 3 years now, which mostly meant playing golf and complaining about the economy. "We don't want to create an awkward situation," he added, as if my continued presence would somehow contaminate Emma's success. Awkward for whom? I thought, but said nothing. Apparently, having supported this family financially for 16 years, had bought me the right to remain silent during my eviction. They left for Gibson's Steakhouse, chattering excitedly about Emma's first day tomorrow, leaving me alone in the house that I'd helped maintain but had never truly belonged to. I stood there for several long minutes, looking around the living room where I'd spent most of my life, the beige sectional sofa that I'd helped buy when Emma was in high school, the large screen TV that I'd purchased as a family Christmas gift 2 years ago, the coffee table books about European travel that my parents liked to display but had never actually read. The photos on the mantel told the story of this family's priorities more clearly than any conversation ever could. There was Emma's high school graduation, Emma at homecoming, Emma with her sorority sisters, Emma on spring break, Emma at her college graduation. I appeared in some photos, always half to the side, always slightly out of focus, always looking like someone who'd wandered into the frame by accident. In group shots, I was consistently positioned at the edge, ready to be cropped out if needed. Looking at those photos, I realized I'd been living like a guest in my own home for decades, grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way, always trying to earn my place at a table where no chair had ever been reserved for me. For the first time in a long time, everything made perfect sense. The conversations that stopped when I entered a room, the family jokes I was never in on, the way my parents' eyes would glaze over when I talked about my work, but light up when Emma mentioned her classes, the way they'd supported every decision Emma made, but questioned every choice I considered, the way they'd invested in her future, while treating my contributions as obligations. I'd spent so many years telling myself I was imagining the favoritism, that I was being paranoid or jealous, but I hadn't been imagining anything. The favoritism had been real, consistent, and deliberate. I picked up my phone and called Sarah Chen, my colleague and friend from Meridian Financial. Sarah was a senior financial analyst who'd started at the company around the same time I did. We'd bonded over shared experiences of working our way up in a male-dominated field, and over the years, our professional relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. A few months ago, she'd invited me to split rent on a 2-bedroom apartment she was renting alone in Lincoln Park. The rent was reasonable by Chicago standards, and the location was perfect. Walking distance to the L, close to good restaurants and coffee shops, in a neighborhood where young professionals actually lived. At the time, I'd refused, saying I needed to stay with family. The truth was, I'd been scared. Scared of change, scared of independence, scared of what would happen to my family's finances if I stopped contributing. Now I realized how ridiculous those fears had been. They'd never intended for me to stay permanently. They'd just needed me to stay long enough to get Emma launched. Sarah, it's me, Jessica. Is that offer to share the apartment still on the table? She was clearly surprised. Sarah knew about my family situation, knew about the financial responsibilities I carried, knew about Emma's education expenses. She'd often commented that my family was lucky to have someone so generous and responsible. Of course it's still available, she said. But what happened? You seemed so certain you couldn't leave home. It's a long story. Can I come over tonight with my things? Absolutely. I'll leave the spare key under the plant by the front door. If I'm not here when you arrive, the left bedroom is yours. There's fresh linens in the closet. I hung up and looked around the living room one more time. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange liberation, like I'd been holding my breath for 34 years and was finally being told I could exhale. I felt like someone who'd been playing a rigged game for decades and was finally walking away from the table. I started packing, and the process of dismantling 16 years of adult life was surprisingly cathartic. Each item I folded into suitcases told a story of sacrifice, of putting others first, of trying to earn love through utility. Arranging 16 years of adult life into suitcases wasn't easy, but I discovered that when you really want to leave a place, you can be remarkably efficient. Each object I packed brought back memories, and all of them confirmed what I'd suspected for years but never allowed myself to acknowledge. I'd always been treated differently in that house, and the difference hadn't been subtle or accidental. It had been systematic and intentional. The jewelry box my grandmother left me, which had sat on my dresser for years, barely containing the small collection of pieces I'd accumulated. Most were gifts to myself. A simple necklace here, earrings there, purchased when I got raises or promotions. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant, because there was always something else the money needed to go toward. Emma's jewelry collection, which I'd glimpsed during her packing for college, could have stocked a small boutique. Gifts from birthdays, Christmas, graduation, just because occasions that seemed to happen monthly. My clothes told a similar story. Mostly work-appropriate pieces from department stores, chosen for durability and versatility rather than style. Professional but not fashionable. Adequate but not exciting. I'd learned to shop like someone on a tight budget, even when I was making decent money, because I was supporting multiple people on my income. Emma's closet had always looked like a fashion magazine. Designer jeans, brand-name sweaters, trendy boots, multiple formal dresses for various college events. She'd never had to choose between looking good and paying bills, because I'd eliminated that choice for her. The books on my shelves reflected years of self-improvement and professional development, all purchased with my own money. Accounting textbooks, business management guides, self-help books about networking and career advancement. I'd invested in my own education when no one else would, trying to improve my situation through pure effort and determination. Emma's bookshelves had been filled with assigned reading for classes that I'd helped pay for, supplemented by recreational reading she'd had time for because she'd never had to work. As I packed my professional certificates and diplomas, I thought about how differently our achievements had been celebrated. My high school graduation had been marked with dinner at a chain restaurant and a small gift of cash. Emma's high school graduation had warranted a party, professional photography, and a laptop computer. My college graduation, from a state school, attended part-time while I worked full-time, had earned me a card and a congratulations. Emma's college graduation from Northwestern had been a 3-day celebration involving extended family, expensive dinners, and gifts that probably cost more than my entire education. The disparity hadn't been subtle, but I'd rationalized it all. College graduations are bigger deals. Emma's younger and needs more celebration. You're more mature and don't need as much attention. I'd become an expert at creating explanations that made the inequality seem reasonable. Going through my desk drawers, I found years of financial records that told the story of my adult life in stark numbers. Receipts for Emma's textbooks, invoices for her dorm room furniture, payment confirmations for her study abroad program, credit card statements showing payments for family utilities, household repairs, Emma's car insurance, her sorority fees, her spring break trips, thousands upon thousands of dollars that I'd considered family investments, but which had really been me subsidizing Emma's lifestyle. I'd kept meticulous records, partly out of professional habit and partly because I'd always harbored some vague notion that keeping track mattered, that somehow my contributions would be recognized or appreciated. Looking at those records now, I calculated roughly $240,000 over 16 years, $250,000 that could have been my house down payment, my retirement fund, my travel experiences, my further education. Instead, it had become Emma's privilege and my parents' financial freedom. I found the thank you cards I'd saved over the years, notes from Emma thanking me for birthday gifts, Christmas presents, graduation money, always polite, always appreciative, but reading them now, I realized they read like thank you notes to a generous aunt, not to a sister who was sacrificing her own future for Emma's benefit. There was no recognition of the scope of what I was giving up, no acknowledgement of the ongoing nature of my support. Just simple gratitude for specific gifts, as if each contribution existed in isolation, rather than as part of a systematic transfer of resources from my life to hers. I packed the cards anyway, not out of sentimentality, but as evidence, proof that I'd tried to be a good sister, that I'd cared about her success, that I'd invested in her future out of love rather than obligation. My photo albums told a story of someone always on the periphery of her own family's life. Pictures from holidays where I was clearly the photographer rather than the subject. Vacation photos from trips I'd helped fund but couldn't afford to join. Birthday celebrations where I was present but never the focus. Looking through them, I realized I'd been documenting years of exclusion without even knowing it. I'd been creating a visual record of my own marginalization, keeping careful track of all the moments when I hadn't quite belonged. At 10 p.m., I finished packing everything that mattered to me. 2 large suitcases, a duffel bag, and 3 boxes of books and papers. 16 years of adult life condensed into items that fit easily in my Honda Civic. It was both depressing and liberating to see how little space my life actually occupied in that house. All those years of feeling like I was essential to the family's functioning, and my personal belongings barely filled a car trunk. Before leaving, I walked through each room one last time, saying goodbye to a life that had never really been mine. The kitchen where I'd prepared countless family meals but had never been allowed to plan menus or express preferences. The living room where I'd watched TV shows chosen by others. In furniture arrangements I'd had no say in. Emma's room, with its coordinated bedding and carefully chosen decor, looked like something from a design magazine. My room looked like a hotel, functional, clean, but utterly impersonal. Even after living there for 16 years, it had never truly been mine. In the hallway, I paused at the family photo wall. Dozens of pictures chronicling Emma's life from birth to college graduation. A few pictures of me at various ages. But even in childhood photos, I seemed somehow separate, like I belonged to a different family who'd gotten mixed into the album by mistake. I realized that even as a child, I'd been treated as fundamentally different from Emma. Not just because of the age gap, but because of some decision my parents had made about who deserved investment and who deserved utility. Before I left, I wrote a note and placed it on the kitchen table where they'd find it in the morning. Thank you for teaching me to be independent. I've learned that self-reliance is a valuable skill, and I'm grateful for all the practice you've given me. I hope Emma's success brings you the happiness you've always deserved. Jessica. It wasn't sarcasm, though it might have sounded like it. It was genuine gratitude for an unintended lesson. They really had taught me to be independent, even if that hadn't been their goal. They'd taught me that I couldn't depend on family for emotional or financial support, that I needed to build my own security, that I should never expect more than I was explicitly offered. Those were valuable lessons, even if they'd been painful to learn. I left the house at 10:30 p.m., loading my belongings into my car under the streetlights. The neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowing in windows of houses where families were probably settling in for the night. Parents helping children with homework. Couples discussing their days. Normal families doing normal things. The kind of family life I'd always imagined I was part of, but never actually experienced. Sarah had left the key under the planter as promised. The apartment was small but welcoming, decorated with warm colors and comfortable furniture that actually looked like it was chosen for comfort rather than impression. My room was simple but had a large window overlooking a tree-lined street. It was clean, bright, and most importantly, it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I had a space that belonged to me alone, that I wouldn't have to share or justify or earn through contributions to someone else's life. I fell asleep that night without the usual anxiety that had become my normal bedtime companion. No worrying about whether all the bills were current. No mental calculations about upcoming expenses. No planning for Emma's needs or my parents' expectations. I slept like someone who'd been carrying a weight for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I woke up the next morning with a sensation I couldn't immediately identify. It took me several minutes to realize what I was feeling. Peace. For the first time in years, I'd woken up without immediately thinking about what I needed to do for other people. It was Monday, Emma's first day at Weber & Associates, and my first day of genuine independence. The parallel felt significant. She was starting her professional life with every advantage I'd helped provide, and I was starting my real life with nothing but my own resources. Sarah had already left for work, but she'd left a sweet note welcoming me to the apartment and mentioning that she'd bought extra coffee and bagels for breakfast. It was such a small gesture, but it felt enormous. When was the last time someone had done something thoughtful for me without expecting anything in return? I sat at the small kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching sunlight stream through clean windows. The apartment felt peaceful in a way my family home never had. There was no undercurrent of tension, no sense that I needed to be useful to justify my presence. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't responsible for anyone else's bills, anyone else's problems, anyone else's future. The feeling was so foreign it was almost uncomfortable. I picked up my phone and saw a string of notifications from the family group chat. My parents had been documenting Emma's first day like proud parents do, but with an intensity that seemed excessive even for them. 6:47 a.m. A photo of the special breakfast my mom had prepared. Fresh fruit arranged artistically, expensive pastries from the bakery downtown, premium coffee, and fresh orange juice served in crystal glasses. The caption read, "Fuel for our future CEO, 7:15 a.m. A photo of Emma in her new professional wardrobe taken in the front hallway. She looked polished and confident in a way that spoke of never having worried about money. The caption read, "Our brilliant daughter conquering Chicago, 7:22 a.m. A photo of Emma getting into her car with a caption about how proud they were to see her beginning her career journey, 8:30 a.m. A photo of the Weber and Associates building taken from the sidewalk with a caption about their daughter working in one of Chicago's most prestigious firms. The documentation was excessive, even by social media standards. They were celebrating Emma's first day of work, like other families celebrate weddings or births. Every moment was being captured and shared as if it were a historic occasion. I read through the messages without responding, struck by the contrast with my own professional milestones. When I'd gotten my first job at 18, there had been no celebratory breakfast, no proud photos, no documentation for social media. When I'd received my CPA certification 3 years ago, the accomplishment had been acknowledged with a brief "congratulations" at dinner. When I'd been promoted to senior accountant last year, my parents had responded to the news with polite interest before quickly changing the subject to Emma's semester abroad plans. The difference in treatment was so stark it was almost comical, except it wasn't funny at all. I got ready for work with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. No checking bank balances to see if family bills had been paid. No mental calculations about upcoming expenses. No anxiety about whether Emma needed anything for school or whether my parents had mentioned any household repairs. For the first time in my adult life, my salary was entirely my own. The commute to downtown Chicago felt different too. Instead of using the time to worry about family finances, I found myself actually noticing the city. The architecture of the buildings, the energy of people heading to work, the way the morning light reflected off the windows of the skyscrapers. I'd been living in Chicago my entire life, but I realized I'd never actually experienced it as a place where I belonged. I'd always been just passing through, always mentally preoccupied with obligations and responsibilities that kept me from being present in my own life. At Meridian Financial, Sarah greeted me with genuine warmth and curiosity about how the move had gone. I gave her the basic details: family tensions, need for independence, gratitude for the opportunity to share the apartment. "You know," she said as we settled into our workstations, "you seem different already, more relaxed. I've worked with you for 8 years, and I don't think I've ever seen you this calm." Her observation surprised me. I hadn't realized how much stress I'd been carrying, how much mental energy had been devoted to managing other people's needs. Without that constant background anxiety, I felt like I could think more clearly, focus more completely. During lunch, Sarah suggested we celebrate my independence with dinner at a nice restaurant. "You've been taking care of everyone else for years," she said. "It's time someone took care of you for a change." The phrase hit me unexpectedly hard. When was the last time someone had wanted to take care of me? When was the last time someone had suggested doing something nice for me without expecting anything in return? We went to Alinea, a small but elegant restaurant in Lincoln Park. Nothing too expensive, but nicer than anywhere I'd been in years. During my family years, any discretionary income had gone toward Emma's experiences, her dinners out with friends, her sorority events, her spring break trips. Over dinner, Sarah asked me about my family situation with the directness that had always characterized our friendship. "Jessica, I've known you for 8 years, and you've always talked about your family like you owe them something. But from everything you've told me, it sounds like they owe you." She was right, but hearing it stated so clearly was still jarring. I'd spent so many years justifying their behavior that it was hard to see the situation objectively. "I guess I always thought I was contributing to something bigger," I said, "like I was investing in the family's success. But what were they investing in you?" The question hung in the air between us. What had they invested in me? Not my education, not my professional development, not my happiness, not my future. They'd invested in my usefulness. When we returned to the apartment that evening, I experienced something I'd never felt before. The simple pleasure of coming home to a space that was truly mine. No obligations waiting, no expectations to fulfill, no one else's needs to anticipate. Sarah and I settled into an easy evening routine, cooking together, watching a movie, talking about our days. It was the first time in my adult life that I'd experienced what healthy family dynamics actually looked like. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with the first call from home. It was my mother, and her voice carried an edge of panic that I'd never heard before. "Jessica, where are you? I came to your room to talk about Emma's first day and you weren't there." "I moved out last night, Mom." I left a note on the kitchen table. There was a long pause, and I could hear my father's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "But why didn't you tell us you were leaving? We went to Gibson's last night to celebrate Emma, and when we came home, we just assumed you'd gone to bed early." The question revealed so much about how they saw me. They'd gone out to celebrate Emma's achievement, naturally assuming I wouldn't be included, and hadn't even checked on me when they returned home. "I did tell you, Dad. He told me to pack my things and leave." Another pause. "Well, yes, but we didn't think you'd actually leave immediately. We thought you'd want to discuss arrangements, timelines, financial transitions. Financial transitions." There it was. They hadn't expected me to actually leave because they hadn't figured out how to replace my financial contributions yet. "There's nothing to transition, Mom. You made it clear that my presence here was conditional on financial utility, and Emma's success has eliminated that need. Jessica, don't be dramatic. You know your father didn't mean it like that, but he had meant it exactly like that, and we all knew it. The words had been too specific, too calculated to have been spoken in anger. They'd been the result of planning and discussion. I'm fine, Mom. I'm living with a friend, and I'm happy. But what about the bills? The electricity is due tomorrow and the water bill comes next week." And there it was. Not "Are you safe?" or "Are you okay?" or "Can we talk about this?" The first concern was about money. "You'll have to figure that out. Dad and Emma both have income now. Jessica, that's not fair. You know our situation. Our situation. As if I were still part of a family unit that needed to solve problems collectively. As if yesterday's conversation hadn't made it clear that I was not considered part of our anything. I know your situation exactly, Mom. You have a daughter with a college degree earning $85,000 a year, and a husband who's been retired for 3 years. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I hung up before she could respond, and immediately turned my phone to silent mode. The calls continued throughout the evening. 7 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, and surprisingly, 3 from Emma herself. I didn't answer any of them. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own peace of mind over their emergencies. The next morning brought a series of increasingly desperate text messages. From Mom. "Jessica, please call us. We need to talk about this situation rationally." From Dad. "This is childish behavior. Come home so we can work this out like adults." From Emma. "Jess, everyone is freaking out here. What's going on?" Emma's text was particularly interesting because it was the first time she'd acknowledged any awareness of family dysfunction. For years, she'd seemed to glide through life oblivious to the financial arrangements that supported her comfort. Either she'd genuinely been unaware of how much I contributed to the household, or she'd been very good at pretending ignorance. I responded only to Emma's text. "Ask Mom and Dad to explain the family financial structure to you. I think you'll find it illuminating." By Wednesday, 3 days after I'd left, the tone of the messages had shifted from demanding to pleading to angry, and back to pleading. My father left a voicemail that perfectly encapsulated the family dynamic. "Jessica, I know yesterday I was a bit harsh, but you understand that the family situation has changed, right? Your sister is going through a difficult transition, and we need to support her. Be mature and come home so we can discuss this rationally." A bit harsh. He was already rewriting history, minimizing what had been said, avoiding responsibility for the cruelty of his honesty. Emma's first day of work had become a difficult transition that required family support, despite the fact that she was earning more than I did. And I, if I didn't immediately return to solving their problems, was being immature. The manipulation was so textbook, it was almost impressive. Thursday brought unexpected information from an outside source. Madison Kim, Emma's best friend from Northwestern, called me at work. Madison and I had always gotten along well during their college years, and she'd often commented on how generous and supportive I was to Emma. "Jessica, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I heard about Emma's job situation and wanted to check on you." Emma's job situation? I was confused. Had something happened on her first week? Oh. Madison sounded surprised. "You don't know?" "Know what?" "Emma was fired on Tuesday, her second day." My stomach dropped. Whatever issues existed between Emma and me, I didn't want her to fail. Despite everything, she was still my sister, and I'd invested too much in her success to feel anything but concern when it was threatened. "What happened?" Madison's voice was careful, like someone delivering bad news to family. "It was pretty bad, Jessica. From what I heard from other people at Weber, Emma showed up on Tuesday with a really entitled attitude. She was rude to support staff, made comments about people who didn't have college degrees, and got into an argument with her supervisor about the assignments she was given." I listened in growing horror as Madison described Emma's behavior. The arrogance, the dismissiveness toward people she considered beneath her, the assumption that she should be treated differently because of her education and background. The final straw was when she told Mr. Weber himself that she didn't think she should have to do entry-level work because she graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern. "Oh, Emma," I whispered. Mr. Weber called her into his office and terminated her employment immediately. He said her attitude was incompatible with the firm's values and that he'd never seen such unprofessional behavior from a new hire. The irony was devastating. All those years of my parents treating Emma as special, as superior, as deserving of privileges, had created someone who couldn't function in the real world. She'd been so thoroughly convinced of her own importance that she couldn't adapt to an environment where she was expected to prove her worth. "Jessica, there's more." "More?" Weber and Associates is a small industry. Word travels fast. Stephanie Richardson, the girl who recommended Emma for the job, is devastated. Her family has connections throughout Chicago marketing firms, and they're making sure other companies know about what happened. This was worse than I'd initially understood. Emma hadn't just lost one job. She'd potentially damaged her reputation throughout her entire industry. In a field that relied heavily on networking and referrals, being known as someone who was fired for attitude problems could be career-ending. "Stephanie feels terrible," Madison continued. "She really went out on a limb to get Emma that job, and now her family's reputation is affected too. She's saying she'll never recommend anyone again without really knowing their character." Poor Stephanie. She'd tried to help a friend, and had been professionally embarrassed as a result. Emma's behavior had harmed someone who'd shown her kindness. How is Emma handling it? That's the thing, Jessica. From what I've heard, she's telling people it was a misunderstanding, that the company had unrealistic expectations, that she was discriminated against for being young and ambitious. Of course she was. Emma had never been taught to take responsibility for her failures because she'd never been allowed to experience any real consequences. Every setback in her life had been cushioned by family support and financial resources. She'd never learned that actions have consequences because someone had always been there to absorb the impact for her. "Madison, thank you for telling me. I appreciate your honesty. Jessica, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I've always admired how much you've done for Emma. A lot of us noticed how you supported her through college, and we thought she was really lucky to have such a generous sister." The comment hit me unexpectedly hard. Other people had noticed what I'd done for Emma, had recognized the sacrifices I'd made. But Emma herself, and my parents, had somehow managed to see my contributions as normal, expected, unremarkable. When I hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness for Emma, who was experiencing her first real professional failure; anger at my parents, who'd created this situation by never teaching her humility or work ethic; and a strange sense of vindication. The privileges I'd helped provide had actually done Emma a disservice. All those years of shielding her from financial stress, of enabling her to focus solely on academics and social activities, had produced someone who couldn't handle the basic challenges of professional life. My phone rang an hour later. It was my mother, and her voice was completely different from our previous conversation. Gone was the irritation and impatience. Now she sounded desperate. "Jessica, you need to come home. There's been a family emergency." "What kind of emergency?" "Emma lost her job. She's devastated, and we don't know what to do." The bills are piling up, and without her income, her voice trailed off. Without Emma's income, they were back to having no income at all except my father's small pension and whatever my mother might be able to earn. After 3 days without my financial contributions, they were already in crisis mode. Mom, I'm sorry Emma lost her job, but that doesn't constitute a family emergency for me. How can you say that? She's your sister. She's my sister who never acknowledged what I did for this family. She's my sister, who stood there smiling while Dad told me I was only tolerated for my financial contributions. There was silence on the other end of the line. Jessica, your father was upset. He didn't mean those things. He meant every word, Mom, and you know it. Another pause. Please, honey. We need to stick together as a family. The word family was being deployed like a weapon now, used to guilt me into resuming my role as financial provider. But I'd learned something important in the last few days. I didn't have to accept their definition of family. I didn't have to agree that family meant sacrificing myself for their benefit. Family members support each other emotionally, I said. They celebrate each other's successes. They treat each other with respect. What you're describing isn't family. It's financial dependence. I hung up again and turned off my phone. That evening, Sarah and I had a long conversation about family dynamics, boundaries, and the difference between love and exploitation. She shared her own story of establishing independence from parents who'd expected her to financially support extended family members indefinitely. The hardest part, she said, was realizing that their love had always been conditional on my usefulness. Once I stopped being useful in the way they wanted, I discovered how shallow their affection really was. Her words resonated deeply. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn love through utility, never realizing that love shouldn't require earning. On Friday, exactly 1 week after I'd left home, I received an unexpected visitor at work. Emma appeared in the lobby of Meridian Financial, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the confident young professional I'd seen the previous Monday. In her place stood someone who looked lost and scared. When the receptionist called to tell me I had a visitor, I was tempted to say I was unavailable. But curiosity won out over caution. Emma was waiting in the lobby, nervously clutching her purse and looking around like she'd never been in an office building before. When she saw me, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Jess, we need to talk. I led her to a small conference room where we could have privacy. She sat across from me, and for the first time in our adult lives, we were meeting as equals rather than as provider and recipient. I heard about Weber and Associates, I said gently. I'm sorry it didn't work out. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected sympathy from me. How did you... Then, understanding dawned. Madison called you. I nodded. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I messed up, Jess. I really messed up. It was the first time I'd ever heard her admit to making a mistake. I thought I knew how the world worked, she continued. I thought because I had good grades and went to a good school, people would just respect me automatically. Emma, respect is earned through how you treat other people, not through your credentials. I know that now. Her voice was small, but no one ever taught me that before. The admission hung between us. She was right. No one had taught her how to be humble, how to work her way up, how to treat people with dignity regardless of their position or education level. She'd been raised to believe she was inherently superior, and when that belief collided with reality, she hadn't known how to adjust. Why are you here, Emma? I wanted to apologize, and I wanted to ask. She paused, struggling with words. I wanted to ask if you'd help me figure out how to fix this. The request caught me off guard. In 22 years of sisterhood, Emma had never asked for my advice about anything. She'd asked for money, asked for favors, asked for support, but never for guidance. What kind of help? I don't know how to live without money, Jess. I've never had a budget, never paid a bill, never had to choose between things I wanted because I couldn't afford both. I've never had to work for anything. The honesty was brutal and refreshing. Mom and Dad are freaking out about money, and they keep saying you'll come back and help. But I don't think you should. I think... She paused, gathering courage. I think maybe it's time for all of us to grow up. The conversation continued for over an hour. Emma told me about her experience at Weber and Associates, about how shocked she'd been to discover that her education didn't automatically entitle her to special treatment. She talked about the financial panic at home, about the reality of bills and expenses that she'd never had to consider. She also, for the first time, acknowledged what I'd done for the family over the years. "I knew you paid for things," she said, "but I didn't really understand how much until this week. When Mom started showing me the bills, started explaining what needed to be paid when, Jess, I had no idea. How could you not know? You lived in the house. You benefited from all those services, because I was never taught to pay attention to money. Every time I needed something, it just appeared. I thought that was normal. I thought that's how families worked." Her naivety was both infuriating and pitiable. She'd been 30 inches from financial reality her entire life and had somehow remained completely oblivious to it. "Emma, do you know how much your college education cost?" She shook her head. "Including tuition, room and board, books, study abroad, and all the extras. Probably close to $200,000. Her eyes widened. "I had no idea it was that much. Do you know who paid for it? Mom and Dad?" But her voice indicated she was starting to understand. "I paid for about 60% of it. Mom and Dad paid for the rest out of money they saved because I was covering household expenses." She was quiet for a long time. "Jess, I don't know how to thank you for that." "I don't need thanks, Emma, but I needed acknowledgement. I needed to feel like my contributions mattered to this family, like I was valued for more than just my ability to solve financial problems." We talked about the job search process, about rebuilding her professional reputation, about learning to work with people from different backgrounds and education levels. I gave her practical advice about networking, interviewing, and workplace dynamics. But I also made something clear. I wouldn't be resuming my financial support of the family. "I understand," she said. "And honestly, I think you're right. We all need to learn how to take care of ourselves." When Emma left, I felt cautiously optimistic about our relationship. For the first time, we'd talked as adults rather than as provider and dependent. She'd shown genuine remorse and a willingness to change, but I also knew that change would be difficult for her. 22 years of privilege couldn't be undone in a single conversation. 2 weeks later, I received a call from my mother with a tone I'd never heard before. Gone was the panic, the demands, the manipulation. Instead, she sounded tired but determined. "Jessica, could we meet for coffee? I'd like to talk to you." I agreed, choosing the same neutral cafe where we'd had our previous confrontation. When I arrived, my mother looked different. She'd aged in the past 2 weeks, but she also looked more alert, more present than I'd seen her in years. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm learning," she said with a wan smile. "Learning a lot of things I probably should have learned years ago." She told me about the past 2 weeks, about the scramble to understand household finances, about learning to budget and prioritize expenses, about my father going back to work part-time at his old insurance company, swallowing his pride to ask for his job back, about Emma starting a job at a smaller marketing firm with a much lower salary and a very different attitude. "Jessica, I owe you an apology. Not just for what your father said, but for years of taking advantage of your generosity." The words hung between us. An actual apology, without qualifications or excuses. "I think we convinced ourselves that you were happy to help, that you didn't mind carrying the financial burden. But the truth is, we didn't want to look too closely at the situation because it was convenient for us." She paused, seeming to gather strength for what came next. "We treated you like an employee instead of a daughter. We invested in Emma's future while taking your contributions for granted. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. These were words I'd waited 34 years to hear. "Mom, I never wanted to be treated like Emma was treated. I just wanted to be treated like I mattered." "You do matter, Jessica. You matter so much, and we were too selfish to show you that." We talked for 2 hours, having the most honest conversation we'd had since I was a child. She told me about the family dynamics she and my father had created, about how they'd gotten comfortable with the arrangement where I provided financial stability while they focused on Emma's development. She acknowledged that they'd trained me to be useful, rather than teaching me I was valued. She admitted that they'd never considered what I was giving up to support Emma's opportunities. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a real conversation between adults who were finally being honest with each other. "I'm not coming back home," I told her. "I know, and you shouldn't. You deserve to live your own life, and I'm not going back to paying family bills. I understand. We need to learn to support ourselves." When we parted that day, she hugged me with genuine affection rather than manipulative pressure. "Can I call you sometimes? Not for money or help, just to talk?" "I'd like that, Mom." 6 months after leaving home, I had coffee with Emma to hear about her progress at the new job. She'd started as a marketing assistant at a small firm, earning about 1/3 of what she would have made at Weber and Associates. The adjustment had been difficult, but educational. "I'm learning to work with people who didn't go to college," she said. "And you know what? Some of them are smarter and more creative than anyone I knew at Northwestern." She'd also moved into a studio apartment with a roommate, learning to budget and prioritize expenses for the first time in her life. "It's terrifying," she admitted, "but also kind of exciting. I'm discovering what I actually like and want, rather than just accepting what's given to me." She was saving money to take courses in digital marketing, planning to earn additional certifications that would help her rebuild her professional reputation. She was approaching her career strategically, rather than assuming opportunities would simply present themselves. Most importantly, she was learning humility and work ethic, developing relationships with colleagues based on mutual respect, rather than assumed superiority. "I understand now why you left," she said. "I understand why you had to establish boundaries. I don't think I would have grown up if you hadn't stopped enabling all of us. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were building a connection based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency." A year after leaving home, I look back on that painful Monday evening as the beginning of my real life. The day my father's brutal honesty forced me to confront the truth about my place in that family became the day I started building a life based on my own values and priorities. I learned that establishing boundaries isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. I learned that my worth as a person isn't determined by my usefulness to others. I learned that love shouldn't require earning. Living with Sarah taught me what healthy relationships look like. Relationships based on mutual care, shared responsibilities, and genuine affection rather than utility. We've become genuine friends, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating each other's successes. With the money I used to spend supporting my family, I've been able to invest in my own future. I completed my MBA last spring, earned entirely through my own resources. I'm considering starting my own accounting practice, something I never could have dreamed about when all my income was committed to other people's needs. I've traveled to places I'd always wanted to see but never thought I could afford. I've taken courses in things that interest me, rather than things that were professionally necessary. I've built an emergency fund, started a retirement account, and for the first time in my adult life, I feel financially secure. My relationship with my parents has slowly improved, built now on honesty, rather than financial dependency. We have dinner together once a month, conversations that focus on our lives and interests, rather than on problems I need to solve for them. My father went back to work and discovered that he'd actually missed having professional purpose. My mother started a small catering business, building on skills she'd developed over years of cooking family meals. They've learned to support themselves and found satisfaction in their independence. Emma completed her probationary period at the smaller marketing firm and was promoted to marketing coordinator. She's building a reputation for hard work and collaboration, slowly repairing the professional damage caused by her earlier arrogance. She's dating someone who works in nonprofits, someone who's teaching her about service and social responsibility. We're all healthier as individuals, and slowly, we're becoming healthier as a family. The most surprising discovery has been how much happier I am living authentically, rather than trying to earn love through sacrifice. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not resentful. I'm grateful for the lessons learned, even though they were painful to learn. Today, when I wake up in my sunny apartment that I share with a true friend, when I go to work that challenges and fulfills me, when I make decisions based on my own goals rather than other people's expectations, I feel something I never experienced in 34 years of trying to be useful enough to matter. I feel free.